Hello, this is Artemis_anime, and today I am reading Glued Cuteness by Skylar Sky High and TerraX_X. Chapter 4. Summary. Having to protect 20 students at the USJ is hard enough, but an additional tiny kitten? Shota's in deep trouble. Notes. This fanfiction was written as a roleplay collab between TerraX_X and Skylar Sky High. Editing was done by X. They hope you'll enjoy. Shota got into a fighting position when he saw a swirly portal. Villains. He had to keep his class safe. He had to make sure they were okay. "Get out, now," he yelled at his students. The students complied quickly, not wanting to lose their chance to pet Izuku. Shota pulled the kitten out from his pocket and pushed the confused kitten to Bakugo. "What the? Get out!" Shota yelled and jumped down towards the villains. Izuku meowed loudly, and he stared after Shota. He tried to keep him in his sights, but climbing onto Bakugo's shoulder and mewing pitifully when he was held close. "You heard him," Bakugo grumbled and ran away with the class. Izuku pawed at Bakugo unhappily. "I don't like this either, fluffball," Bakugo grumbled before skidding to a stop when the warped villain appeared in front of him. "Shit," he cursed and shoved the cat to the nearest person, which happened to be Uraraka. "Take care of this little shit." "Bakugo, wait!" He went charging into the villain with Kirishima. It proved to be ineffective, and most of the class got sent through the portal. Shoji managed to grab onto Ashido and Uraraka before they could get sucked in by the vortex. Izuku whined quietly, cuddling into Uraraka. Uraraka gently pet him. "It'll be okay, Izuku. We'll protect you." Izuku squirmed a bit to try and see Shota. He managed to squeeze his head through and saw Shota fighting the villains. He mewed and tried to wriggle out of the grip completely. He had to help. "Izuku, no!" Uraraka cried out and tried to reach towards him, but the tiny kitten was too fast. Izuku watched, running down the stairs as fast as his tiny legs could take him as Shota fought the villains. He watched as the weird-handed villain hurt Shota. He watched as Shota struggled to fight back. He could only watch as a giant creature that seemed wrong stood behind him, intending to hurt Shota. He needed to help. He needed to help his amazing human who had helped him. Shota had saved him. They were a family. He had to find a way to help. Something burned in him, and his world shifted as his body grew stronger and bigger. He leaped up towards the enemy and bit down, crushing its head with his jaws. Shota gaped as he stumbled back, staring in shock at the massive dark green panther that had jumped in and bit the head of the monster clean off. The panther dropped the head before he turned to him, jaws and teeth dripping with blood. Izuku checked his family member over worriedly, uttering little meows that somehow sounded a lot louder than usual. Weird, but Shota was more important. He turned his attention to the hand person, the one who had hurt Shota. He growled lowly as he stood between him and Shota. His eyes narrowed as blood dripped from his maw. The handed enemy looked angry, but he'd protect his family. He needed to avoid the same hands that had hurt Shota. He'd warned the hand person, "Stay away from Shota or he'd get hurt." It was an easy warning. Izuku growled lowly. The enemy was angry. He'd started scratching and yelling. Izuku stood his ground. He knew where to target his hands first. The enemy hurt Shota by touching with his hands. Take out his hands and he'd be powerless. He wasn't stupid or cruel, though. He wouldn't attack if the enemy wouldn't attack first, so he waited for the enemy to move. He made sure to protect Shota. He kept alert, his ears twitching a bit as he tried to pick up any and all sounds. He made sure no one would get close to Shota. His eyes were blazing with anger. Then, the enemy-handed person took a step towards him. Izuku's muscles tightened as he lunged. He avoided the hands reaching for him and shifted into his smaller form. He bit down on the hand from the side, breaking the bones under his teeth. He jumped back when the enemy yelped in pain, narrowly avoiding the second hand. He wasted no time crushing the other hand as well. He clawed the enemy to dive him back. The enemy fell to the ground, gasping in pain. Izuku fixed him with a terrifying glare and growled lowly. His instincts screamed at him when the handed enemy yelled for backup. He jumped away in time to avoid the weird mist. Izuku fixed onto the enemy who looked misty. He ran towards him and slashed his claws over the not misty part. Kurogiri tried to make a portal, but it didn't work. He noticed the red-eyed glare directed towards him, a razor head. He winced when his metal plating was sliced. Izuku growled lowly, chomping down onto the metal. He felt the metal band under his jaws and the mist enemy scream. He pulled away to return to Shota, growling lowly. He stared down at the two downed enemies. Shota looked very confused. Izuku kept an eye on the other enemies too. He wanted to help his family. He needed to get help. Even if he could fight the Alpha off, he needed to get more help. He shifted into a different form. Dark-colored fur thickens around his neck, and he took a deep breath and let out a loud roar. Shota held his ears out, but what the hell? How could this tiny Izuku be so loud and look like a lion? The ground seemed to tremble from the loud roar coming from the green lion, the sound traveling far, even reaching Yuhei. Musashi stopped when he heard the weird rumble-like sound. He pulled his phone and called Nezu. "Hey, what was that sound just now?" His eyes widened beneath his shades. "What?" Izuku shook his fur, glaring down at the enemies. He let out another earth-rumbling roar. He looked around, checking on the kids. He could only see a few of them at the top of the stairs. They were startled, but looked unhurt. That was good. Where were the others, though? Had the warp taken them away? Where had they been taken? "You're a cheater!" Shota turned back to the hand villain, who was still somehow standing. His hands were mangled. Both were soaked in blood. He was hanging by a few strands of muscle. The other hand was bent at an impossible direction with bones poking from the skin. Izuku narrowed his eyes at him. "You shouldn't have a pet. A pet shouldn't be so strong. What kind of cheat code are you playing with?" The villain snarled. Izuku stared at the enemy in confusion. What was his problem? "You're just a stupid familiar," the villain yelled. "You should be weak, a weak support animal." Izuku bleeped, licking some of the blood off his snout. "You're supposed to be weak, a weak animal." "Yeah, I don't think he cares about that," Shota gasped out. Izuku meowed at him to ask whether he was okay, though maybe it was a lot louder. "What even is that?" the hand villain yelled. Izuku growled at the enemy. He was too loud. The hand enemy stilled at his growl, twitching in anger. Izuku looked satisfied at that. He needed to make sure the enemy wouldn't hurt anyone else. Those two were the strongest ones. The others had been defeated by Shota. He needed to make sure they wouldn't wake up, so he kept his ears attentive. He made sure the others couldn't hurt them. He had to keep everyone safe. He'd make sure they were safe. He could keep them safe. Meanwhile, quite a lot of students were fighting for their lives. Separated from most of their classes, they had to fend for themselves. Ojiro was fighting villains in the fire zone, evading and landing blows to knock them out fast. In the ice zone, Todoroki crushed villains while Hikakure did her best to stay out of his way. In the earthquake zone, Bakugo and Kirishima were blasting and beating up villains, trying to kill them. They found out they were a pretty damn good team. Bakugo had a ton of firepower and the instincts and reflexes to utilize his quirk efficiently, while Kirishima's hardening made it easier for offensive and defensive, while also making him immune to Bakugo's stray blasts. In the mountain zone, Jiro, Yaoyorozu, and Kaminari were fighting a ton of villains. They'd heard the rumble earlier and it had startled them. It startled the villains too, though. They took the chance to knock out as many villains as possible. "We have to get out of here!" Jiro called out, hitting a villain away. Yaoyorozu gave a nod, whacking the villain with a metal pole. Kaminari, who was fumbling around, panicked. "Calm down, Kaminari," Jiro told him. "I'm not gonna calm down. We're surrounded by villains and no pirate training, and whatever that weird war was scary as hell, and away!" Kaminari ran away while the villain swung at him. Jiro scoffed and knocked down the villain. "You have a quirk. Use it." "I can't control the directions. What if I use it willy-nilly? I might shock you both, incapacitate myself when I go over my limit," Kaminari protested. Jiro fought back more villains. "Typical. How do you expect to be a hero when you cower?" she yelled. "I'm not a hero yet," Kaminari yelled back. "I have a plan," Yaoyorozu said to Jiro. Jiro nodded. "Shoot." Yaoyorozu told her the plan. They all prepared. In the flood zone, Ashido, Asui was beating some villains' asses. The villains hadn't thought things through when they sent her to this zone. The other classmates were holding their own too. The villains had made a big mistake. Izuku stared down at the enemies. Both were incapacitated. The hand was starting to feel the effects of the blood loss. It was good. He would collapse soon. Izuku just hoped the heroes would arrive soon and help the students. He gave a warning growl when the mist villain moved. He got ready to lunge again. The villain was smart enough to stay where he was, especially with Shota erasing his quirk threateningly. Izuku growled once again for good measure. Shota frowned as he kept an eye on the warp villain. If he warped out, then they would get away. Izuku could handle the other villains. His job was to focus on the warper. They stayed like that, nobody moving for a while. Then, the other heroes arrived. The door was slammed open and the UA heroes came to apprehend the villains. Between them, Eraserhead, and the deadly feline, they couldn't escape. Izuku turned back into a kitten once the villains were apprehended and ran over to Shota, meowing at him. Shota blinked at the now tiny kitten again. Hi, Izuku? Izuku meowed. Shota kneeled down carefully and held his uninjured hand out. Izuku nudged his hand against the hand. Okay, Shota said and gently picked him up. He held Izuku to his face. How long have you been able to do that? Izuku meowed and placed his paw on Shota's nose. Of course you can't answer me. Shota sighed and cradled the kitten in his arms. Izuku cuddled into him, starting to purr softly. Sho! Shota turned around to face Hisashi. Are you okay? He asked worriedly. Izuku meowed up at Hisashi, raising a paw. Shota hesitated. I need a doctor. Clearly. Hisashi gently took Izuku. We heard a roar and came. Here. Did little Izuku turn into a lion a minute ago? Izuku meowed softly and cuddled into Hisashi. He didn't move his big eyes away from Shota. This was his family. He wouldn't let them get hurt. Let's get you to the hospital. Hisashi encouraged. Izuku mewed, staring at Shota. Hisashi handed Izuku back to Shota. Izuku buried his head against Shota and meowed softly. I'm alright, thanks to you, Shota said to the kitten. Izuku licked his face. The villains were taken away and to be healed as well. Recovery Girl healed Shota's injuries, but the injury on the elbow would scar. Izuku stubbornly stayed by Shota's side during the whole examination and after it. No one wanted to remove the kitten. One, because you just don't remove a kitten. And two, no one wanted to risk a lion in the examination room after Shota explained what happened. Izuku cuddled against Shota and curled up on his chest right over his heart. Shota ran a hand down Izuku's back to pet him, feeling the soft, fluffy fur. Izuku purred softly. You're strange, Shota murmured. Izuku meowed up at him. You did help. Thank you. Shota gently scratched Izuku's head. Izuku leaned into the touch, starting to purr softly. Shota smiled softly before he stared up at the ceiling and thought. His tiny kitten had a quirk. One that turned him into a panther and a lion. Well, he should get his kitten registered then. A tiny part of him rose up. What if they took Izuku to do experiments on him like they did with Nezu? Izuku purred, nudging his tiny nose against Shota's hand. Shota glanced down at him. Should he risk it? It's not like he could avoid it. A lot of people had seen Izuku transform into a panther and a lion. There was no faking that roar, not to mention explaining the villains he'd mangled. But he didn't want Izuku to be taken. He was just a baby and he'd done it to protect him. What if Izuku had to be put down because he'd attacked the villains? He had to keep Izuku safe. But there was the issue of the villains telling people about Izuku. Shota sighed. Izuku meowed up at him, cuddling against him. He hoped Izuku wouldn't be taken from him. Izuku had been through so much, he didn't deserve any more pain. Maybe he could ask Nezu for help. He should know how to deal with that. Additionally, he was extremely smart. He would find a way to help Izuku. At least, Shota really hoped so. Note from the authors. We hope you enjoyed. If you did, please leave a kudos or even a comment to show us that. I hope you have a nice day. Reader's note. Please do go and check them out. They are amazing writers. Thank you so much for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye!